welcome back to The Laura Show. I have a special guest, although I usually say I have a special guest. Today's guest actually is special because Shannon, you drove in 2 hours to be here with me today, so I'm very appreciative of that. But more importantly, you are like an old friend of mine from way back in the day. I think we actually met when we were in university.
Yep.
Because you were and are best friends with my husband's sister. So for the listeners and watchers, if you could put that together, my husband's sister, best friend, is in the house today. And so Shannon Hunter, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
This is exciting because this is kind of like, I think, my first episode where I know some details of the person and the backstory beforehand. So I kind of want to take us back because I know back in university, you were in science.
Yeah.
So, just to give some context for today, Shannon is a mother of 2, a wife, a business owner, a real estate investor, amazing designer, like interior design. I mean, there's nothing that you don't do.
Sing. I don't sing. Don't ask me to sing.
Okay. You don't want me to sing either. So we don't tell anyone to sing on this show. But school for science, as did I. So tell me about that. What were you doing back in the day?
So my journey has been rather convoluted, like your own. So I have a degree in zoology. I also have a degree in radiation sciences, zoology from University of Guelph, and radiation sciences from U of T. In between those 2 degrees, I worked as a researcher at University of Guelph in the Department of Environmental Biology with Christine, John's sister. So Christine and I had spent time in Africa together as part of our undergrads. There was a professor on that trip with us that we had both sort of convinced to give us jobs we didn't deserve in research. And so we did that for 2 years while we were kind of figuring out what our next step was. Christine's next step turned out to be a master's with that same professor. Mine, I felt like, although I liked the idea of the big idea of the work I was working on, sort of what I did every single day in the lab, just felt a little soul draining. There was an enormous amount of pipetting for 8 hours a day by myself. And I'm just a very social person. So, having that be my reality was tough. So I was looking for something that was still high science, but had a bit more human interaction.
Okay.
Which is how I ended up in radiation sciences to train to be a radiation therapist.
Okay. So this would be for cancer patients?
Yes, exactly. So I enrolled in that, did my residency at Princess Margaret Hospital, started doing some research while I was there with the medical physics department.
Yeah.
Because I had a research background, so I got a side gig. So I never actually worked as a therapist. I went right into research. But while doing all of this, I was also buying condos with my partner at the time.
Yes.
Designing them and flipping them.
Yeah, okay, hold on. Before we get there, because I feel like this is important to note because, as people, I get a lot of people who ask me, Laura, you've had all these different careers. How do you know when the right time to change and make that move? Did you feel like when you were doing all the schooling, because it's not like the schooling that you were doing is easy. I can imagine if you're not that passionate about it, it would be even more taxing. Did you have feelings early on, I don't know if this is right, and you kept with it anyways? Because I did. My undergraduate degree, I should have known right off the bat.
Right.
This was not for me because it was really hard for me.
Right.
And when I look at high school and I look at my grades, I mean, none of my grades would have said go into science. It would have been go into arts, go into drama, all these other things. But I ignored it because of the advice of a guidance counselor. So were you ignoring it, or where were you at on that?
I think it's just I kind of I'm one of those sort of odd people that sort of straddles both sides. So my highest grades were in fact in science and English. And I won awards in both of those things. So I do actually really enjoy the detailed nature of science. And I think one of the things that gets lost in sort of the idea of being a scientist is that, science is actually a pretty creative field. You do actually have to think out of the box. You have to try to think of things in a way people haven't thought of before.
Well, that's it. You're literally coming up with new ideas.
Yeah. So I don't think I had that sense while I was there. And I initially was in zoology at University of Guelph because I really thought my path was to be a veterinarian and a wildlife veterinarian. I had this idea of, chasing elephants in Africa and like
We went
saving
to
them
Africa.
from poachers.
Yes.
And then I went to Africa
Yes.
and actually spent time chasing elephants in Africa. And then I think the reality of what that type of lifestyle would mean kind of sunk in, where it was like, to be in that type of research or that field, you really give up any sort of like chance of having like a stable family life, because you're kind of constantly going where the work is. So there's a project here for 2 years and there's a project
You
there
literally
for 6
have to
months.
pick up your family and move.
Exactly.
Or not see them.
And or like not have one, because like asking a family to be part of that dynamic or a partner is tough.
That's early on. You knew that was important to you. Was
Yeah.
that like maybe you can touch on like your family upbringing a little bit and why that might have been like something that you were like, no, that's something like I want to
Yeah.
prioritize in my life.
So I grew up, very standard sort of like, one brother, mom and dad, lived in a small town. We ate dinner every night at the table together before
Similar
we,
to me, actually.
before
Yeah.
we went to other things, where it was like, oh, we all met for that hour before it was like, my brother was off to baseball and I was off to theater or whatever it was that we had going on. But it was like, that was the touch point during the day for our family. And you also, I know, have a very close family like I do. You're very close with your brother like I am. So the idea of sort of not having that in my adult life, and trading that for this adventure of sort of idea of being this wildlife vet, it suddenly didn't feel like it was worth it.
Got it.
That I didn't want to wake up when I was 50 and, the adventure part of my life was starting to be really taxing and be like,
Now what?
shoot, like
Yeah.
I've missed out on that opportunity now because I've been
That's
living
good
this
foresight.
adventure.
I must say. Thoughts now, like you're not 50, but looking back, right? That was the right call.
No, it was definitely the right call. What I do now, which is drastically different than what I ever thought I would be doing, while it's incredibly stressful at times and there's an enormous amount of pressure, I'm still home every day for a period of time, like with my kids and with my husband, and we still almost every day have dinner together, and I'm still generally cooking that dinner. Like that's something that's important to me, to actually sort of like feed my family and be like that piece for them.
Like literally and figuratively.
Yeah, like I may leave again to
Yes.
go back to work, but I'm there for that period of time almost always with my kids, and it's something that it's interesting because for my kids that's just normal. Like,
Right.
that's what everyone does.
Right.
But even when we have their friends visit, like they're like, oh, like you guys all sit down at the table and you set the table every night, because I don't actually think that it is that common. For
everywhere.
families
Yeah.
to do that. Like,
And
every night.
and some families like everyone's doing what they need to do,
Yeah.
right? There's single moms, single dads. There's families where people work night shifts, multiple jobs. Like people figure out what works for them. But
Yeah.
you're right. You're there is something I think too about the family coming together at the end of the day. Of course, I don't do that now. I don't have kids, so it doesn't seem as important. Sadly, maybe I got to rethink that. But I really enjoyed that aspect when I was growing up too. So I see where you're coming from with that. Okay, so before we get into what you're doing now, you started investing in real estate.
Yeah.
What? Obviously, I'm a real estate agent, so I have to go down the real estate path here.
Sure.
What was it that gave you that light? Because me growing up, it wasn't like I was surrounded by people who invested in
me
real
either.
estate. Nobody did. So
No.
what?
It
Where
was, like,
did you
wasn't a
get this
thing.
sense from?
So when I had just finished undergrad in Guelph and had got this job I didn't deserve in research, and knew I was going to be staying in Guelph, Christine and I both rented little houses in a place in Guelph. It was called The Ward. It was definitely a sketchier part of town. And just down the road, there was an old mill that suddenly a sign went up and was being converted into lofts. So I went to just check out what was happening. I was like, these are amazing. It was 14-foot ceilings and the huge factory windows. And what sounds ridiculous right now, they were $110,000 for
That's a parking spot in Toronto.
for 950 square feet or something.
Yeah, it was huge.
A beautiful loft space.
I have to interrupt because whenever I think of you, that's probably the one thing I think of. I don't know if that was the first time I met you, but it was certainly the first time that I really remember the impact was when you had moved into this place.
Yeah.
And I had never seen like a modern, I mean,
Right.
I'm from the suburbs, then my parents moved up north of the country, then we went to school in Guelph. It's not like I'm used to these like modern, lofty type spaces. And I was like,
And it was really unusual
John,
for
when we get a
Guelph.
place, I want a place like this. And I remember that had such a huge impact on me.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we did that, like, and you know, my partner at the time, who had a very similar appetite for risk, which made it easy for us to kind of make these decisions. We were just like, okay, let's look at sort of what our monthly income, like what do we have to scrape together, like what do we have to spend to be able to buy this? And we borrowed $6,000 from his father, and then we literally would go to the grocery store and we would add up as we were going. We were just like, okay, that's that. We're at 77, like we can only spend 82, you know, because we're going to have to pay the second phase of this, the down payment, shortly. So we scrimped and scraped for sort of 8 months until they were ready and moved in. And then they sort of exploded, and just like you said, like everyone was like, wow, this is in Guelph. There was nothing like that in town at all at the time. And so suddenly the value of them like skyrocketed, and we'd only been living in there for just under a year. And I was at the time considering, I had applied for school at U of T, so we knew we were moving anyways. So we were just like,
let's sell.
Do we sell it? Do we rent it? You know, we'd kind of gone back and forth, and ultimately we were like, it's already increased in a year. So we bought it for 110. We sold it for 230.
Oh, wow.
In like 1 year.
So your first one was a huge success.
So, and then we had the bug. Then we were just like, wow, like if we can like make this kind of money just by being smart about what we chose. So in the building, we chose a really specific unit that was a corner unit because we knew we had windows on like both sides. It had a higher ceiling than other units just because of where it was positioned in the building. So it actually had the capacity to add a second floor if someone wanted to expand it, which made it more valuable.
Right.
We bought 2 parking spots because we thought it's Guelph.
Yes,
like,
people are driving here.
Yeah, they're more dependent on cars, which a lot of people didn't do. So our unit just, you know, had more value just because of the decisions we had made. So then when we were looking to move to Toronto, we were just like, okay, well, let's repeat this. Like instead of renting something when we get there.
And throwing that money away.
Yeah, let's buy something pre-construction that we only have to put a small amount of money on down right now. And by the time we actually move in, it will likely have already increased in value and we won't have paid a cent for it.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened. And again, we were really picky about the unit that we chose. We chose on the 10th floor, and the building originally was meant to be 14 floors, but they only got approved for 10. And
So
we
you were
knew
the
that there was a chance they wouldn't get approved. And so we were like, let's pick this because maybe it doesn't
What
get
was the
approved.
location? Where were you?
The Quad Lofts at like
Okay.
Grant and King.
Okay.
So, and that happened. And so suddenly we had not paid for a sub penthouse. I think they got approved for 11 and we were the 10th. We had a completely unobstructed balcony. And again, it was just like taking a minute to be thoughtful about the unit we were choosing. And then that's also kind of where I started getting into interior design, where it was like, well, if we just asked the builder to move this wall slightly, it would open this up, it would make this more thoughtful.
And you had like no background obviously in that, but so it was just something like you could just see it on the blueprint, like you just had visually an understanding of like maybe how to work a space, how people live in a space.
I've always been spatially aware, and it's taken me a lot of time to realize that, to even identify that as a skill. I think it's like sometimes if something just comes naturally to you, you don't identify it as a skill because it feels like everyone can do this, right? It's like, oh, of course everyone can tell what this is going to look like in 2D
I still do that though all the time. Yeah.
So you discount these things that you really excel at,
and that people actually find quite difficult.
Right, because it wasn't difficult for you to like achieve that skill. Like it's something like we only
if
like
it's
put
easy,
value
then
to
it's
it.
not valuable.
Exactly.
Right? Yes.
Yeah, so then we just kept up that cycle. It was like we always had one we'd bought pre-construction while we were living in one condo, so that we were just kind of like trading up each time.
Damn, I wish, like, you know, I knew you were doing this at the time, but I wasn't in real estate at that time. And I had no background, no understanding of real estate and how it works. So when I moved to Toronto, it was renting. And, you know, in hindsight, had I given it more thought or maybe talked to you a little bit more at that time, I would have been like, yeah, that makes sense, pre-construction, like, I get it. But these things seem so scary at the time, especially if you don't know anyone who's done it before. And I always tell people, like, if you're trying to achieve something, like, go talk to someone who's done it.
Yeah.
Like, they will literally, especially real estate investors, they will tell you everything you need to know. Like everything that they did right, everything that they did wrong. They're not keeping their cards close to their chest because they know that there's more than enough for everybody.
You're not competing for the same one.
Exactly. Yeah, and like it's too late on the one that I did. Like it's too late. So it's funny because now I sell pre-construction condos, and I'm listening to your story, and I'm like, oh man, like you had that figured out very early on before, obviously, this boom that's happened.
Yeah,
so,
and I mean, we did have the advantage in that my partner at the time, his father was a real estate broker in Alliston, like a small town that I was from. So there wasn't like a, condos, and this idea of pre-construction purchasing wasn't a thing. But we at least had someone who was very well versed in sort of real estate as a whole.
I could tell you like market,
and
you're
just,
overpaying, or
we
that
could
would make
bounce
sense.
ideas off him on like how best to sort of figure this out. And like, some of those things were because we were first-time buyers, we took advantage of all the like government advantages that are given to first-time buyers. We made a huge investment and maxed out our RSPs that year so that we got a big refund. And so that refund we used as a down payment on the next one. So just being able to...
So it sounds like you spent some good time educating yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
like going home at night and researching, like working during the day or going to school during the day and then going home. And, it's always funny because it's like you're always got to be on this hustle, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do from the hours of 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. when you go to bed? Or especially at that time, you didn't have kids, so you could do that.
Yeah.
And you clearly took advantage
constantly
of it.
like looking at like what's the next one that's coming up? Like what do I think is going to be not just another tower, but has something interesting about it that will set it apart when I want to put it on the market, because you don't want to be on the market with 60 other things that are almost the same.
Yeah, and I love what you did, and I think this is a great lesson for everyone, because everyone says no one can afford to buy in Toronto. At that time, Toronto was expensive.
Yeah,
like it's always relative. It's always expensive.
People were saying the same thing then.
Then they're like, I can't believe you're going to spend that kind of money on a place, and values go up. I think it's the earlier you can get into the market, obviously you can ride a bit of that wave.
Yep.
But it does go to show, you're sitting here as a successful woman. People don't see, obviously, what you sacrificed and the things that you did prior. And
I made a lot of Mr. Noodle.
Right?
And
that's what I'm saying.
dinner.
Like your health probably took a hit.
Hamburger helper.
Yeah, you weren't going out to dinners. You weren't wearing fancy clothes.
Yeah.
It's not like you bought the fancy car. You said, no, we're going to put our money into here. And like, that's, I think, a testament to you, because a lot of people don't do that. They can't not see the bright, shiny object in front of them today. Yeah. And unfortunately, they get into credit card debt, and you start making, and then you start compounding that with other decisions. So, I understand how it happens, but I also think people have to realize, like, most successful people at some point were truly like,
I think it's almost worse now, though, because back then when I was doing it, social media wasn't a thing. So there also wasn't this like, trying to keep up with everyone. It's like, oh, they're on vacation. Oh, look, they're in Jamaica. They're here. Like, you weren't seeing.
Yeah, you might have
other
known your close friends.
Yeah,
but it's not like you knew like your acquaintances what they were doing.
We didn't feel like we were like missing out on something by making these decisions necessarily. It didn't.
You assumed everyone was at home eating hamburger helper.
It didn't feel like it was a sacrifice. We definitely were careful about things, but I think it's even harder now because you're surrounded by all these like big lives people are supposedly living on social media, and so then you feel like, well, like, oh, I should be doing that also. I should be living that same big life, but that big life is real expensive, and
sometimes
pay dividends. In the
sometimes
end.
fake, or the amount of people I talk to. Who, when they do confide in me, like, you hear people who on the surface, they look like they're living a certain life, but then you find out like, no, I'm $100,000 in debt or whatever it is. And you're like, oh, wow. Like, I wouldn't know that by looking at you. And I certainly wouldn't know that by looking at social media. So, look, I'm on social media all the time. Obviously I create content for social media, but I'm also very particular with what I allow myself to watch, and also specific about what's going on in my head when I'm looking at it. Like if I am looking at friends' stories, it's like, okay, but this is a moment in time. Yeah. And like also know like I'll get there and I'm on my journey. So I remind myself of those things. And I think that's important.
And I have this conversation with my daughter often too, because she's...
How old is she now?
So she's 11. So she's like just getting to that cusp. She doesn't actually have any social media accounts yet. We don't let her. But she can see through Pinterest like some TikToks and that sort of thing. So she's starting to be exposed to it. And a lot of her friends have those accounts. So having those discussions with her to be like, you need to look at social media essentially like a reality TV show. You know, when we watch a reality TV show together, it's not reality, like it's being scripted. There's moments that are being pulled out to tell a story, and that's the same way people are using social media. They're telling the story they want to tell, and they're leaving out all the stuff that they don't want to tell.
Yeah. And what they want to tell is usually my life's perfect.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you know, people aren't always sharing the lows, right? Okay, so I want to go back because maybe you might be able to shed some light on some of that as well. So you're doing the radiation tech work.
So then,
and we're doing simultaneously you have your condo and you're kind of realizing like you have a little bit of a knack for interior design.
Yeah, so we've been flipping condos. I'm working full time in research. And then it started to happen where it was like a friend asked me to do their kitchen. And then a friend asked me to redesign their
for free?
condo.
Out of curiosity?
Well, like initially it was like, come over for dinner and help me pick cabinets.
Okay,
you know?
okay.
And it
Like,
sort
it's
of
just a
like
fun thing, yes.
grew like that. And then the big one was my sister-in-law was moving to Toronto from LA. So she wasn't actually in town, and they had bought a house, and it was a gut reno. And so she asked me to do the gut reno and manage it. And so I managed that full project.
Were you scared shitless? Like, I have no clue what I'm doing?
I think I've always just really sort of trusted myself. Like I don't know, and I think about this a lot too, being a parent. Like, I think I naturally am really resilient, and I really do trust my gut and my ability. So I won't say yes to something that I don't actually think I'm capable of. So yeah, there was moments where I was like, oh my gosh, like this is a massive undertaking. But I also was really confident that I was going to get to the other side. And at the time, I also wrote my real estate license as a side thing.
Just throw that on there as well.
So I was doing that, and then I was pregnant with my daughter. And then it was kind of like, okay, I have a year. I had gotten to a point with the research at Princess Margaret where I was feeling similarly to when I had been in the lab, where again, the big idea of what we were working on was really exciting. And when I spoke at conferences and talked about sort of the big idea, it was very exciting. Mm-hmm. But what I did every day, for the most part, was actually look through patient images, and like circled organs on thousands and thousands of slices from CT scans.
That's just it. Like, it's magnified, so it's not like you see even the person.
No, I didn't actually interact with that person. I just was like, involved in their treatment, but sort of in the background. And so I was becoming dissatisfied in the same way I had been before, with this sort of lack of like human component. So I was pregnant with my daughter, and I was like, okay, I have a year of mat leave. Thankfully, from the hospital, they had a really good top-up program. So I had 85% of my salary to sort of like give me a cushion.
That's good context, actually, because some people, they're having children and they don't have that means, right, to make different decisions. So
I was like, hey, I have this year to try to make interior design a business that I can replace my income in research. And so I started taking clients when my daughter was 6 weeks old.
Oh, wow.
And then I built a business
let's go.
over that year. And so by the time
How did you get clients? Like your first clients' friends and stuff, or referrals?
So it was always just referrals. It was like a lot of people who had been in my sister-in-law's house who were now doing something else. It was the real estate agent that my sister-in-law had worked with to buy her house was giving my name to people, and it just kind of snowballed from there. So by the time...
Did you need like a big budget to get started on this, or because it's mostly a service?
No. That's
not
the
really,
good thing
right?
about starting a service company is that there is very little investment initially, other than I bought a Mac laptop and I upgraded to an iPhone from like a BlackBerry. So I could take better photos.
A little bit, but and maybe a website, or not even, because you were doing mostly referrals, so it didn't matter.
The first couple of months, I didn't have a website. After I finished 2 projects, I did hire a photographer and do some professional photography that I could then build a website out of.
Gotcha.
So by the time the year had gone through, I did have a full website with lots of professional photography on there. And then it came time to decide if I was going back. And I had gotten to the point where I had an office manager and a design assistant, and I was essentially at an income level I'd been at before in research, but it was all mine. And it was like, you know, all the decisions every day were mine. And it was a lot less safe in a lot of ways, but it was also, I would rather feel unsafe, but know that whichever way this goes is going to be a decision I made, and I'm not.
Like you're in control.
I'm not like at the mercy of something like the research grant doesn't get renewed, and suddenly I don't have a job anymore. And I think that's a good lesson, is that there's risk in everything that you do, and there is no safety. Like if you're choosing a job because it feels safe, you know, there's so many people who do jobs for 25 years that they hate because they feel like it's safe, and then that company gets bought by someone and suddenly they're out of a job.
Yeah.
And that safe job was actually not a reality. So if you're going to risk,
you may as well risk it doing
you might as
something
well
you
risk it
enjoy.
doing something you like doing.
Right.
Then hate
And so,
going
and
to
you
work
loved
every
it.
day.
You loved working with people, and you were like, this is much more where I'm at. Like,
yeah, like I loved the challenge of interior design. I loved that interpersonal challenge of, like I often said, like being an interior designer in a lot of ways is like being a therapist, because you're usually
Same
working
with being
with
a real
like
estate
couples.
agent.
Yeah, totally.
Yes.
Which I also started doing as well, because the two of them are so tied together.
Of course.
It was like people are looking at a house, deciding if they want to buy it. So many houses that are in a first-time buyer's price range need renos.
Yeah.
And understanding what that rental will actually cost you is a challenge. And I think there is such little knowledge in the real estate world. So many agents don't
That's true.
fairly tell their
Like what would be required.
fairly tell their clients like how much it's actually going to cost them to do a kitchen reno. And then they watch HGTV and people magically do a kitchen reno for $15,000
in 30 minutes.
and you're like, that's because everything that's in there was donated. Like that's not
Yeah.
a real cost, and people end up with these homes that are a mess, and then they can't afford to renovate them. So, you know, being able to be that voice for clients to be like, okay, this is a great buy, but this is how much it's actually going to cost you to get you to a place where you're going to be happy in this home. So doing those two things together, and then mostly, I think, on both of those jobs, again, you're the therapist between like the couple, and figuring out one of the, and you I'm sure you know this too, one of the most challenging things is figuring out how to talk to people about money. Because
Yes.
people are very touchy about the way in which you talk about
Yes,
money.
and everyone's different.
Everyone's different.
Like some people are like, oh, I'm an open book. What do you need to know?
Yeah.
There's some people, they're like, you know, if you're just talking to one spouse, you'll get the full story
Yeah.
about the money that's hidden under the mattress. The other spouse
Yeah.
has no idea.
and also like understanding like how charged that conversation can be between couples too, because the way in which one part of that couple spends money and thinks about spending money and the way the other one does can be vastly different. And if you come into that situation and you're very flippant about the way in
Like,
which
oh, it's
you're
easy.
talking about their
Yeah, it's
money,
easy
like,
decision.
oh, it's only $10,000 more, you
Yeah.
may lose that client because like $10,000 more to that particular client, and you speaking about it in that way makes them think like, you know, this person doesn't value my money.
Yeah.
They're not even going to try to think about the bottom line because they're just throwing around like $10,000.
Well,
Like, it's
and
not a big
people's
deal.
homes, it's the most expensive purchase most people make.
Yeah.
Unless they're buying planes or something, but you know, and then in which case their house probably still is more expensive. But you know, it's so emotional. It's people's biggest purchase.
Yeah.
It's where they're going to see their kids grow up, and people they picture their dreams in and around this house
Yeah.
and this property, right? So you're doing this. How do you feel? Because now you have a 6-month-old, or at this point, I guess it's been a year, right?
Yeah.
Because you went back to
Yeah.
work. So
She's
how
a
are
bit-
you managing all this?
I have the most amazing nanny in the world. Like I would not be doing anything I'm doing now if it were not for her. And I feel like so often people.
Do you have the same nanny?
Same nanny who's been with us for 11 years now.
Oh wow! Like they become your family.
They're part of your family, and it bothers me when people don't acknowledge those people who are propping them up. Like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm like
Juggling
super
it
mom
all.
and I can do it all. That's absolutely not the case. Like,
Yeah.
my husband and I actually joke that like our nanny, Marjorie, is the better parent. Like, she is just like a wonderful, loving human being who actually enjoys every minute she spends with our children. Like, she loves playing with them. She's not dialing it in. It's not a job. She's not, sitting in the other room just keeping them safe. She actually loves
She's been
them.
parenting them for 11 years too. Was that a hard decision for you to make? Because I think some people, some viewers and listeners, if they have young ones, this is a hard choice for a lot of people to make because they feel like they're being pulled in two different directions. I have lots of girlfriends who have kids and they're like, I want to go back to work, but I don't know if I should or if I can't. I don't know if the money I'm going to make work makes it worth it. My husband has expectations of what I should be doing. So can you touch on that? Like, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I think you have to be really honest with yourself about sort of who you are and what you need for yourself to be happy. And I think you have to have that sort of internal dialogue. And I know for me, there was no chance that I was going to be happy, being a stay-at-home mom. It's just not in my DNA. And it's hard sometimes to say that out loud because it makes it feel like it can be construed that somehow that means I love my children less than people
or that
who
you're
have that
not
capacity.
a good mother.
Right? But it's just, I'm just not built for that life. Like, I need to be out and being challenged.
And you kind of know, I'll be a better mother if I'm fulfilled in this other place.
COVID is a good example of that, when I actually was stuck at home, actually living that life with Elle doing online school, and it was incredibly challenging because it's just not natural to me to fill that role.
Well, that goes to what you were saying earlier, right? Like, some people, that is natural to them. So they're probably thinking well, what's wrong with you?
Right.
But you know what? There's other things that come natural to you. So it's always comes down to that self-awareness component. And I think people don't see that. They're trying to say I want to be like this other person. Oftentimes it's funny when I think about growing up, I always said to my husband oh, I'll be a stay-at-home mom because I grew up with a stay-at-home mom. So that was what you do. And if you're a good mother, you stayed at home. And it's so funny. He said to me when we were younger, he's like, you're not going to be a stay-at-home mom. He's like, that's crazy. And I was like, yes, I will, because look at my mom. I have the best mother in the world, and so I'll do the exact same thing. Now, I don't have kids, and I haven't had to make that choice, but it's funny now, knowing myself at 38, I would be the exact same as you. I'm like, I'm not staying home, because I just know myself more. And sometimes that comes with age, life circumstance experience.
For sure.
But for me, it does point to a fact of just knowing who you truly are, what's going to make you happy. Because I think a fulfilled person, you have to fill your cup first before you can fill everybody else's. And I think so many mothers, they don't fill their own cup, and then in times it can cause resentment and it can cause depression and just unhappiness, right? So you need to make sure that you're covered, and then you can start giving to everybody else.
Yeah, and I think initially, because Elle was so little when I started working, when she was 6 weeks, so stepping out of the house, that I tried to join a Mom and Me group, and I think I was 2 months, and I was late for it the one day, and so I arrived and I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, I was at a client meeting, and the looks of
client meeting.
You're working?
And you're late also?
I was like, oh my God.
Right.
That's
so you have to find your tribe too, not
socially acceptable in this group. This isn't this group. These aren't my people.
These aren't my people, which is fine. And it's not a judgment to the women that were there at the time.
No,
but it's about finding people that you feel you drive with.
Yeah.
And it's so funny at work, obviously with your career and what people do for a living. I probably never saw myself, if someone said, what do you see yourself doing? I could never really pinpoint it, but it's funny. Now it makes so much sense to me. The people I surround myself with is actually why I come to work every day. I don't love being a real estate agent every single day, but it's I love the people I work with. Yeah. And I love how we all are striving toward a similar goal. Yeah. And I think that sometimes is more important, the tribe. Okay. So you're downtown. I remember hearing the news of you leaving the city. Yeah. Why did you leave the city? What happened there?
So I was doing design and real estate, and at the time, the general contractor I was working with on most of my projects, we had started chatting about starting to buy homes and flipping them together, sort of under our own label. At the same time, my husband and I were looking for a cottage in Prince Edward County. So we bought a cottage.
Why Prince Edward County, out of curiosity?
So I liked the idea of the county because it was a lot less expensive than some other cottage areas at the time. I thought it was really undervalued.
Because at that time, Prince Edward County
so
was,
that was like
was not
2015.
Yes.
So it was like well before sort of this big cusp. I just thought it was really poised for a big glow up because it was underpriced. Like what you could buy for $500,000 or $600,000 there compared to what you could buy in Muskoka or even the Kawarthas was dramatically different. And we couldn't really afford to get sort of what we wanted in Muskoka. So that's why we just thought, and also we didn't want to be doing the like slog up the 400, like knowing we could like do the 401 and there is a lot more options to sort of like get out of traffic if you need to. So yeah, that's really why we started looking there. And also because both my husband and I, my husband who had lived in Chicago the whole time we were dating, had read an article on Prince Edward County in the Porter magazine because we flew Porter back and forth. We were like, this place sounds
Porter
amazing.
magazine really sold
them.
them.
Totally. So we went and checked it out a couple times and it just like the vibe was just sort of, and I liked, the other challenge I had with sort of Muskoka or Kawarthas was it's much more sort of you just get to your cottage and that's the destination. And then you sit on your dock and you barbecue and sort of chill. But I needed a place where I could go to, but then there were other things to do sort of surrounding that. And like knowing
like
there were
restaurants
wineries
and amenities and
restaurants and there was like a culture that you could become a part of.
Are you kind of like that as like, do you have a hard time sitting still?
Yeah. I yes and no. Sometimes yes, but sometimes I just like the idea that I could do something if I wanted to. But I'm not actually going to do it. It's just I need to know there is the possibility.
If I need to get out, I got to get out of this house.
Then I can do it.
Something's there.
But my husband definitely, he has a much harder time sort of just like sitting and unwinding for hours at a time. Like he does like, he's a like, what are we doing next sort of thing.
Yes.
You know, like a puppy wagging its tail. Like, are we going somewhere else? Like, what are we doing? Yeah, totally. So 2015, we bought that cottage. My contractor partner, he's gonna laugh because I say this in every time I talk about this, but he like had a bit of a hissy fit, was like, I can't believe you bought this real estate investment without me. And I was like, you mean my private personal cottage? And at the
because at that time you had bought everything together, really.
Yeah, we had like everything we sort of did together, and Airbnb was really just starting to sort of like trend at the time. It was still kind of a new idea, and so we got professional photos done. You know, I used up all of the furniture that I've been storing in storage lockers for years from like leftover design projects that I didn't have the heart to return that annoyed my husband.
Oh, wow.
But then when we bought the cottage, I could be like,
he's like,
see?
You're welcome.
We don't have to buy any
And
furniture.
he's probably like, well, for the storage fees, we could have bought new furniture.
This
But
is
anyway,
why we paid
neither here nor
for
there.
storage lockers for 4 years. Yeah, and then it was kind of a radical idea at the time to like get professional photos taken. Like people were still like snapping photos with their iPhone and throwing it up on Airbnb, and it was still.
Why did you know you wanted to use it as an Airbnb and not just keep it for yourselves?
So we were hoping just to rent it a few times a year, enough to cover like our property taxes. Essentially,
Okay.
that was the goal.
Just
it
to
was
get
like,
some money back.
Yeah. Well, just like let's try to break even. That was
Like
the
any
goal.
weekend we're not going to go, or the shoulder seasons kind of thing.
And we bought it in September. It was ready to rent by early December. I put it up December 15th. Our first guests literally stayed 3 days later. And then sort of Christmas holidays hit. And by the time we got to January 1st, because I hadn't really been paying, like the entire summer was booked. Like we didn't even get to go to our own cottage the first summer because it booked so quickly. And then I was like, hold on a second, like this is something here. Like this is not our cottage anymore, it's a business. Now I'm like incrementally increasing the cost per night to see where I get to a ceiling where I'm
And then
seeing
you
a
know
fall
that, okay,
off.
now I got to come back
exactly,
down.
and I'll pull back. And it didn't happen. I just kept moving it up, and like that fall off never happened. And then all the weekends booked. We thought, oh, we'll go on the weekend in the fall and spring then. Nope, they're booked too. And
Everything's booked.
Everything's booked.
So now you have the bug.
So now I'm like, hold
Another
on a
bug.
minute. Like this,
bigger
there's
bug.
something here. And Danny was still having his hissy fit. So I was like, hey, put your money where your mouth is. Let's buy another one. So we bought another one, and then we bought another one, and then we bought another one. So like over the course of the next year, we bought 3 more, renovated them, put them on, and so we had 4.
So would you say now that renovating them was kind of and doing the Airbnb stuff was more your focus like day in, day out, or were you still doing the
I was
design
still
work?
doing design, so it was definitely a 50-50 thing. Like I was spending 2 to 3 days a week in the county. I'd drive out early, check on everything, have a late lunch and drive back. I'd usually leave at like 5 a.m. so I'd have no traffic. I'd be there ready to work by 8, and then I'd be back at home for dinner kind of thing. So I'd have like a full day. And we were doing, like, each of those properties was doing over $130,000 in revenue a year. And we were hosting like over 3,000 people a year.
Obviously good reviews, because that's why people kept renting it out.
We were 5 stars across the
What
board.
do you attribute that to for anyone who is an Airbnb host? Like, what do you think is the key?
So at the time, it was a very different market. I will say that. Most people, like I said, were not really treating it as businesses. People were just renting out their cottage to get a few extra dollars a year, and that was it. And they weren't providing any service. They weren't providing any sort of luxury touches. They were not putting in nice linens. There weren't fluffy towels. There weren't flowers when you arrived. That type of thing.
So they didn't make it feel like a hotel, where you did.
Exactly. So we just like stepped it up, and we're like, I think there is a whole market that's being missed here of people who are looking for a luxury experience and are willing to pay for it. And we were booked solid on everything all the time. And we would release the next summer, January 1st, and it would sell out in like 3 days, like every single house. So, so we were doing that. I was still doing design and real estate. And then a resort came up for sale, like a little sleepy
and you thought,
cottage resort.
Yeah. What made you think this is the path?
So, I mean,
Because a resort sounds different than an Airbnb
Totally.
place.
Absolutely. So Danny and I kind of went back and forth on, do we want to be hoteliers? Like, this is a very different thing. But then when we started looking at what we were actually doing, in a lot of ways we were already doing it, and we were already doing it in a way that was harder to manage because we had multiple properties spread out around the county. And one of the things that I think is misunderstood about the county is that in terms of land mass, it's actually huge. It's an hour and 15 minutes from one side to the other and from top to bottom. So having properties spread out over that amount of land area is hard to manage.
It's not down the street from each other.
Yeah, because your cleaning company is going from that one, and then it's an hour and 15 minutes for them to get there to deal with an issue. We already had a full-time maintenance guy working for us and cleaning crew, so we had employees already that we were managing. And when we looked at the numbers, it was like we're already hosting over 3,000 people a year. Like we're running a hotel essentially, but with less control over the experience guests are having.
And who knows when, like Airbnb also through this time, like Toronto was locking down and places
and
were
that
locking
started
down.
to happen also where the county started to talk about putting bylaws in place. What protected us is they had put in a grandfathering policy, so ours were grandfathered, which also made them much more valuable in terms of selling them. So when the resort
even when you
came
sell
up,
it, it's grandfathered.
the grandfathering
great.
actually moved with it, which is different than some other
Yeah.
jurisdictions. So this resort came up. It had 13 cabins. The same people had been running it for about 15 years. It was meticulously well cared for, but the couple that was running it, they just knew it needed sort of like a design refresh, and they didn't want to do it. They were just like, it needs fresh blood, the same way they had bought it 15 years ago.
Yeah, they put everything into it, and now they're good.
Just like, we're ready to move on. But they didn't want to sell it to someone who was going to sort of tear the whole thing down or build a subdivision or do something that didn't feel like it was honoring sort of the tradition of the property. So I spent a year like touching base with them, stopping in, having tea, to just build a relationship with them, for them to think I was the right person, so that while in the background I was frantically looking for an investor to sort of back me.
Yes. Okay. So how was that like? Because you're now also in sales mode.
Yeah.
You're like trying to sell this idea to somebody else.
Yeah.
So you have to like crunch
I
the
had
numbers,
like 6
run
years
the
of
performance.
projections done. I had all the design drawings done. I knew exactly what I wanted to build. I just needed someone to believe in the project, in the product that I was trying to build. And then sort of same with like my daughter, it all kind of came together when my son was 3 weeks old, and we got a random phone call of someone who had sold properties in Muskoka wanted to now invest in Prince Edward County. They had bought a house.
Like they knew you, or this was like a random call?
Yeah, it was like sort of, in the end, there was a connection, but
Okay.
initially it was random. So they had someone out to clean this new house that they had bought, and the cleaner, who I had actually just fired, which is weird. But anyway, she was like, you need to call Shannon. She gets the highest rates per night in the county, which we did by a mile at that time. So they randomly like reached out.
That's a fun title to have.
Wow, right?
I'm just like, I get the highest rates in the
Yeah,
county.
and I mean, it wasn't a hard battle to win at the time. It's a very different market now. So we don't want to discount what people are doing now. It's a much more competitive market, and you have to be much more, you have to have a full brand and like a social media. Those things you didn't nearly need to do then. You could really just live off your Airbnb profile. But yeah, so this call came in. They asked if we would be interested in managing their property. We had been asked before, and we'd always said no, because I was like, I only want to manage like my own properties because I know the product that I'm selling, and I don't want it to be someone else's, because I don't want there to be like a guest is unhappy about something that I don't have the power to change. But this call was different. I could tell the person on the other line was very business savvy. They were in commercial real estate in Toronto, like very successful. So we said, okay, we'll come see the house. So I packed up my 3-week-old son and drove to the county the next day and walked through the house, and it was beautiful. It's like 6 acres, like 6,000 square foot house on the water, beautiful. But really the play was, I think there's more to this partnership down the road.
Right.
I thought it was going to be a much longer, like
take from start to finish.
Yeah, like I thought it was going to take
years.
them a while for them to be comfortable with me. But we called back, said, yes, we're interested. This is what we'll do it for. We had agreed to terms, and it was like, let's have lunch and, cheers to this new partnership. And I brought the pro forma for the resort and everything with me. And I was like, I don't know if you guys are interested or if there's further investment you want to do, but there's this resort that I've been trying to put together a deal on for a year. I think it's a steal. This is what I think I can do with it. Here's everything. And we put an offer on it like 4 days later.
I gotta say, it sounds like you have a lot of confidence in these moments. Like, I think that's like what I'm learning throughout like what you've been saying and your career path and everything you do is like you just seem to believe in yourself. Like a lot of people would say, I don't know, maybe now's not the right time to bring this up, or I don't know how to sell this because I've never sold something like this before. Right. And a lot of my audience are women, and I feel like that's not an exclusively women trait by any means, but sometimes was it a man that you were dealing with?
Yeah. Two brothers.
So that can be intimidating.
Yeah. I think
at times.
I think part of it is just do the work. If you've done the work, you'll know from doing the work if what you're selling is worth selling or not. So, I never go into these moments just speaking off the cuff. Like, I've done the work.
You've done the research.
Answered the questions. Yeah. I know the hard numbers, and here they are. And if you've done the work, then you can be confident in those moments because you're ready for them.
So they obviously bought into you as well. They bought into your dream and what you were showing here.
For sure, because we hadn't even started renovating there, or we hadn't even started managing theirs. But we also had 3 years of running an Airbnb business that was very successful. So we did have a track record that we could, and I knew that market. Like, you could ask me anything about that market at the time, and I would be able to answer.
It sounded like you always kind of had your eyes open as to what's going on and homes for sale and whatnot. Okay, so you get this resort. Yeah. This resort now becomes.
So we bought the resort. It was called Sunrise Cottage Resort at the time. We took possession of it May 1st of 2019, and I ran it that summer as Sunrise Cottage Resort because it was already sold out for the summer. I wanted to get my feet wet sort of running a resort and getting an idea of sort of some of the things that I may not be appreciating about the property and also just the business as a whole. So I moved myself and my 2 kids. So now my son was just under a year. My daughter was 7 at the time. My husband stayed in Toronto because he's a family physician and had a practice to run. So he'd come out on weekends. And I ran the resort myself.
Was that a hard decision for you guys as a family?
No, I think it
No.
was just like, this is what
You're doing
we
your
need
thing,
to do.
and I'm doing-
yeah,
okay.
like, in
All
order
right.
to get to the other side, like, this is what we're doing. And
I have to
and
ask because you just never know. Sometimes these things
Yeah.
are like you have to sell the
I have
spouse as well.
an incredibly supportive husband who has always known who I am and has never asked me to be anyone but. So these crazy ideas that I come up with on a regular idea are just part of the package.
He's
of
like,
being
sure.
married to
Yeah.
me. And you know, we always joke that the scariest statement I ever make is, I've been thinking, and Noah's always like, oh my
no.
God, what are you doing?
What are we doing
What-
now?
What did you buy?
Where are we moving?
What property did you buy?
Okay, so you move out to Prince Edward County. He's living
so
here.
I moved for the summer. I hired one reception staff, and I had my maintenance guy who also was doing the and cleaning team that also did the Airbnbs. And so we ran the resort like that for the summer. Learned lots of lessons, and in October we gutted it and started turning it into what is now Wander the Resort.
And was that the vision that you originally sold it to the?
So no, like what we ended up doing was actually even larger.
Even
than we
larger.
thought.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say, I feel like, because I remember seeing the
Yeah.
resort online, like what you were running it as it was back
Yeah.
in 2019, and I've looked at it now. So this is where I have to brag on behalf of my friends. It's moments like this where I feel like sometimes, like with me, I'm like, that's my friend. You know, I know her because I got to tell you guys. Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong here. So you turned this thing into a hotel, Wander Resort.
Yeah.
In 2022, RBC Canadian Women Entrepreneur Award. You were of the ones to watch.
Yes.
You earned that title for Wander.
Yes.
For what you were doing here. And then on Condé Nast Traveler in 2021, it was ranked the best hotel in Canada.
Yeah, best new hotel in Canada.
Best
And
new
we
hotel
also
in Canada.
made
Like, that's my friend.
we also made Travel and Leisure's hot list that year as well, and it was the only Canadian hotel to make that list.
So
but
you turned this
before-
into, like, how do we get to this
Before
point?
we got
where-
there, there was a global pandemic, which threw a major wrench in what
In
we
the
were doing.
hotel plans,
So
yeah.
so we gutted it in October, like literally ripped it apart. We kept the steel
Of
roofs.
2019.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then we officially, as a family, moved December 31st of 2019 to our cottage, and then in March, you know, the world fell apart. And
Were you done the renos by then?
No.
Even? So
We were
okay.
like
So at least it
giant
wasn't like
open
we're
pits.
open though.
But it was worse because what happened was April 1st, I was pulling into the grocery store. This is like deep early pandemic where everyone is really afraid that, you know, everything you do is going to kill you. So like going to the grocery store, I left my family at home, you know, bathing in hand sanitizer. And I pulled into the grocery store and Danny called, and who is a partner on the resort. And he was like, I just got a call from the bank and they are pulling all hospitality financing. And I was like, Danny, this is not a funny April Fool's joke. Like, this is not the day. I'm not having a great day. I don't want to play this game. He's like, I'm not joking. He was like, Danny, take it back. He's like, I can't take it back. That's the phone call I just had. So I literally like turned around and drove back to the cottage. And I got back to the cottage and Noah was like, where
Where are the
are
groceries?
And I just was like, I have to lie down. And I was like,
So your world, it felt like it must have been crumbling
because that was
apart.
all our construction financing. So we'd done all the portion of the construction
That you
that we
had.
self-financed,
Yeah.
and we were right at the point where we were about to start drawing construction draws, because that's the way construction financing works. You have to put in your equity first, and then the bank comes in for the cost to complete, essentially. So if
So
you're doing
so you're like
so
mid-construction.
we've
It's not
already
like you
put
can
in
go
all our
back.
money. Yeah, now I have nothing to run because I've ripped it apart. It's not like I can run it as Sunrise Cottage Resort like that coming summer. So Danny and I were just like we just have to get on the phone. Like we just
gotta
can't,
figure it out.
we just can't accept that this is the end or that we're paused. And so that's what we did. We just started like calling people at
Like
Montreal.
banks? Okay,
and
I was
like
gonna say
made
banks
our
or
way up the
if you-
chain until we got to a VP who was actually from Kingston. So had a real appreciation of Prince Edward County and what was happening in Prince Edward County and what the opportunities were there. So it was really lucky that we ended up sort of having a conversation with him.
It's so
And-
interesting though, because most people they would say, well, I went to the bank said no.
Yeah.
You're like, no, we went to the bank and the other bank, the next bank. It's like, it doesn't
Yeah.
work as like the person you're speaking to is speaking on behalf of the whole bank.
Right, because
either, right?
you just have to find a champion within the
Wow.
bank who believes in what you're doing, because that's what gets you across the line. If you're dealing with someone who doesn't understand the business you're trying to run, you will never get approved. You have to find someone who gets what you're doing. And that might be 10 different places you have to go, and it might be 10 different branches. Like, you could
So
be the
just
same
through
bank.
sheer
It's just-
tenacity,
you just have to
you guys
get
just
that,
persevered.
and we found him, and he understood it. And essentially, our play was just like, listen, you're holding the first mortgage on this property right now. It's worth nothing to anyone right now. So you are actually in a worse position than us, because if we just walk away right now, you own a very expensive pit, essentially. So let's get across the finish line together. Like, this is what we need in order to open. This is how we're going to get there. This is our timeline. And so that was April 1st. So June 1st, we got the financing, and then we started construction again.
And then when was it ready for
So
the
then
first
we
guest?
were meant to open December 1st, and then COVID again stepped in, and all roof accommodations
what a good time.
were
Yeah.
shut down, and it was another lockdown. And then we actually opened February 12th of 2021 for 6 weeks. And then Prince Edward County Public Health shut down all roofed accommodations in the county. It wasn't every jurisdiction that did that, but it was ours. So we had
It's
to
like
close.
every way you turn, there was obstacles and hiccups.
We had to close. We had a whole staff we'd hired because we'd just opened.
Right.
So we kept all our staff, and we didn't qualify for any
And
government
why did
grants.
you keep the staff?
So the way things had been happening at the time, it was like with no warning, things would open up. It'd be like...
Right. So 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, they'd be like, the next day there'd be an announcement like, oh, all restaurants can open tomorrow. And, restaurants would be like, we don't have any staff. Like, why didn't you give us any warning to get to a place where we could open? So we didn't want that to happen. And it's a real challenge to get staff, good staff, anywhere. And it's particularly a challenge in the county because it's, we don't have the same pool of people to choose from. So we just thought, I don't want to be in a position where 3 weeks from now we're allowed to open and we don't have staff, and that's why we're not opening. So we decided to keep our staff, and we just bled money for 2.5 months. We didn't qualify for any government grants, so we couldn't cover salaries with anything because we hadn't been open long enough. We didn't qualify as being...
So you guys are just
so
putting money into it.
Paying everyone full time to not
do nothing.
work, essentially.
Wow.
And then we were allowed to open June 3rd.
So June 3rd. So in the last 6 months of the year, you become the biggest, baddest, newest hotel in Canada.
Well, and these articles actually came out the month before we were allowed to open, because they'd actually come and stayed with us in February, unbeknownst.
Okay, I was gonna ask. So
yeah,
now this is really for my. It's like, is it like Michelin star? Like, you don't know they're coming, or do you invite them?
So we knew that a journalist was coming. We didn't know for what or why. Or
but you knew this person's the journalist.
Yeah, someone was coming to write an article or something, and then we found out that we'd won and we were going to be on these lists, and we were just like, what?
Tell me about that moment. Must have been all that hard work, all the stress.
It was amazing, and it was a really good day because it validated kind of everything we'd been doing, but also it was an enormous amount of pressure, because instead of just quietly opening and finding our feet and working out the kinks, it was now every single person that was landing on our site June 4th was expecting the best new hotel in Canada. It was
but we're actually just a new hotel.
We've only been open one day. There was no room to sort of miss on the expectations.
Yeah, the expectations were high.
Yeah.
And so you just figured it out. Obviously,
we figured it out, and we were sold out for that summer because we had pre-sold, and we did a lot of work in our social media before to build a brand and to build the idea of what we were going to be. So we were sold out almost a year before we opened. Because our team just did an amazing job of selling sort of what we were, and it was obvious that it was really lacking in the Canadian hotel market. So we knew as soon as we opened we'd be full, which was great from a revenue perspective, but also same thing, it was there was very little wiggle room. It was if we're not fast enough flipping rooms between guests, there's another guest coming. We don't have rooms to move people around.
How many rooms are there?
So we have 10 cabins. They are luxury mini houses, essentially. Really, they're 2 bedrooms, a living area, heated floors,
I mean,
full
the pictures
kitchen,
online
dishwasher.
are so gorgeous. And I tried to book last year at this place, but I should have gone to
Gotta
the source.
It's like a year, yeah. So we release, especially for summer, we release so for summer 2024, we released January 2023. So we were already like 70%.
Okay, so I really got to get my ducks in a row for the future.
I always
2027, here I'm coming.
I always joke I would never be able to stay at Wander because I'm not organized enough to actually book in time.
Yes, but some people are, obviously, you're doing an incredible job. I feel like there's so much to be proud of. Tell me about the award that you won, because this is like a culmination of your entire career.
So the ones
being
to watch,
recognized, ones to watch, like that's pretty cool.
It was very cool, and it was also presented to me by Joanna from NYX, who had won it 5 years before.
Oh, wow.
So it was like, okay, here's another incredible female entrepreneur in Toronto who 5 years before was like a ones to watch winner, and now sort of.
And is this like something voted on by your peers?
It was a massive undertaking. So my PR team had nominated me. We thought it was a huge long shot. So within RBC's Entrepreneur Awards, there are very specific amounts of time you have to have been running to qualify for sort of each award. So we'd only been open long enough to potentially qualify for the ones to watch. So you have to submit this very, very detailed application to sort of even just be on the list and go to the next. So we did that and thought, well, we'll never hear anything again, but it's a good exercise to go through because maybe we'll try again another time. And then we heard back that we'd been shortlisted. And then it was a 4-month due diligence process. I mean, they check everything. Like, we had to put them in touch with our lawyers, our bank accounts, our accountants, so that what you're saying about your business can actually be
verified. Oh, wow. They're making sure there's no skeletons in this closet.
And so that we started the process. It was in January or February, I believe, was when the nominations happened. And then we were in due diligence all summer. And then I found out that I had won, I think it was mid-August.
Wow.
And then the ceremony is actually in November.
Oh, that's so amazing. Yeah. I feel so proud, oddly, because I know you. And I just think it's so cool to know where we started. We both started in science, just starting in this little condo, and figuring it out, and how all these decisions somehow transpired into what it is today. Feelings for the future. Are we going to do another one, make it bigger? Where are we at?
I mean, that's the goal. The goal was we always we built Wander initially sort of as a brand, and sort of what it would mean to stay at a Wander property, regardless of sort of where that Wander property existed. So the idea is to build more, but to be very careful about that expansion, because I think what can happen is you have something that feels really unique and interesting, and then you build 100 of them and you lose that. It's just simple economics. If there's scarcity, it's more valuable.
Yes.
And so we want to make sure that whatever we do next, that we're doing it because it is the right place to put a new Wander, and it meets all of the criteria of sort of what that means, but also that it's not going to take away from the existing one.
Who came up with the name?
So it was my sister-in-law, actually.
Oh, yeah?
I went to the county and just did sort of a day of going
Wandering.
through everything and just totally, and just throwing out names and figuring out what we wanted. And initially we actually had landed on Wanderlust, because we were just the person who stays at Wander tends to be very well traveled. They really understand what they want out of a travel experience, and because of that, they have a Wanderlust for life, and sort of discovering what is out there, and really wanting to have authentic experiences where they stay. So I always find it really jarring when you stay in a hotel in Spain and then you use the shampoo and it's from Mexico. I just feel like whatever you're experiencing in the place you're staying at, you've chosen to come to that place. And so everything in that space you're staying in should represent that place. So I've totally lost my train of thought now.
Well, now me too, because I'm
yeah.
I don't even know. I was really, you should, because I was thinking back to the photos that you have, where you have all the little things and the trinkets, and it all kind of represents, where it was coming from. And then you said Wanderlust, and that was going to be the name, and then where we were going to go. Yeah.
So, and then we sort of tested Wanderlust out with just some, and then one too many people were like,
The movie?
maybe it sounds like it's like a swingers resort. And we're like,
Oh.
okay, so that's
Isn't there
out.
a
Like,
movie called Wanderlust?
I think there is.
Oh, okay.
But like, even if there's like 10% of people
Right.
who like that's where they go
Right.
with the name, that's probably not. And then we were like, oh my gosh, back to the drawing board. We'd already done a logo and everything. And we were just like, well, what if we just use Wander? Because it means to go out and sort of experience and
I
do it
love
in
it.
like a meaningful way,
Yeah.
not just speeding
It's funny
through.
how names, like people sometimes put a lot of emphasis on the name first, and I think the point really is you have to do things first, and kind of the name kind of comes into place. We could talk forever and ever and ever, clearly, because we're buddies, and I'm sure I've already gone over time. But I did want to open the floor to you because I feel like you've had so many experiences, so many obstacles and things you've learned, whether it's around juggling it all, which you do a great job of, or with the help of other people. Leadership, we haven't really touched on that, and if you enjoy it, if you like it, or something about the hotel world specifically. I want to give you like the open floor for anyone who you think you want to like connect through the camera and say like, this would be my tip to you. Like, think of you when you were younger. What is something that maybe you wish you would know?
I think the biggest takeaway I get from any time I do a talk anywhere, the thing people ask the most is like, how did you know that it was time to leave where you were? Like, how did you know it was time to open a hotel or change careers? Because there's obviously been some very dramatic changes. And I think my advice is always that you're never going to know for sure. There's risk in everything that you do, but do the work. Like, do the work. Prove to yourself that the idea of what you think you can do or you want to do is defensible, and that anything anyone asks, you have the answer to that question. And once you've gone through that process, it's much easier to know if you're willing to bet on yourself to move forward or not. But having this like just idea of sort of what you may want to do from what you're doing now, that's not enough, I don't think, to make a leap. You have to do the work first, and you have to be willing to do that work, and you have to be willing to be wrong. Because sometimes you do the work and realize, actually, I don't know if that is a good idea.
Yeah, and it's funny. It sounds like from your story, like it's like, oh, she did everything right, like the pre-construction condo thing and then the Airbnb thing. But along the way, there was obviously a lot of hiccups and things that probably would have shown you like, ooh, maybe I am making a big mistake. And it's funny, I get that question a lot too, because I have had so many different careers and they're kind of all over the place. It's like, how do you go from science to fashion to real estate to a training company? So I was really intently listening to what you had to say there, because I do think it's true. You're never going to know what's on the other side. You don't know one way or the other. And the good news is that once you've made the decision, you also don't know what not having made that decision would have been. So it's kind of like you just have to do it. But I like what you say, because I'm a very thoughtful person too. And it sounds like, you don't just willy-nilly make decisions. It's you kind of start the process of proving to yourself that this might be something that you'd be interested in. So you start doing the research like on your free time. And it's not just like, oh, let me quit my job today and sort of see how this all goes and turns out. It's
and
like you've proven to yourself
probably
along the
like
way.
the scientist in us to some degree, right? It's like you have to.
We have a hypothesis, and then we test it a little bit
like,
with our little
go through,
pipettes.
You have to like find the facts that support like what you want to do. Like, this is what I think could be a viable business. I'm going to do the work to see if, in fact, I can defend that hypothesis.
And then it's funny because people will say, well, there's so many naysayers. Like, I told my parents and they told me not to do it, or I told my spouse and they told.
But my parents lost their minds when I was leaving a
you were
safe
convinced,
hospital job that had a very good pension. But for me, it was like I watched my parents their whole lives work in jobs they didn't like and look forward to their 2 weeks of holidays every year to get away from that job because they were safe. And then you know what happened? When my dad was in his 50s, he was let go of that job that he had poured himself into for 30 years, and he had to start over. And it wasn't safe in the end. So he could have spent that 30 years doing something he really loved and actually bet on himself. It would have been just as risky.
So you just shut out the noise then when people are telling you don't quit the safe thing?
Again, I think it just comes back to if you've done the work, you can answer that question. If it's like, well, what about the pension? What about this? What about that? Well, this is where I think I'm going to be in 5 years with this because I've done the work. This is what I think I can be doing for revenue. This is what I think my net worth will change to. if you have done the work.
Well, that's a
you
lot
can
better than my answer. My
usually-
answer would be to tell someone to fuck off.
Well, I mean, that
because maybe I don't know.
as well.
Like you also don't
But
always
you
have all
can
the
feel
answers.
confident telling
Yes.
someone to fuck off if you've done the work.
Nicely.
Yeah.
Depending who it is.
Nicely. I didn't know we were
Yes.
allowed to swear. I would have been.
Oh
fine.
yeah, no. I should have. So next time I got a note. Tell people that we can swear on the show and have wine ahead of time. Shannon, honestly, I feel like we could have you back because I know that you're going to be on doing so much more, and people will want to know the journey. And so I hope if the show continues on that we'll have you back, which
I'd love to be
have
back.
every
Next
plan
time
on
with
it.
wine.
Next time we will have wine, and you'll
And
know that you
swearing.
can swear, and it'll be a lot more colorful a podcast. But thank you so much for being
Thank
here and
you.
sharing all your ins and outs, and I wish you even more success in the future.
And you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And guys, we'll see you next time.